Hello, everyone. Are we on? Gonna start the session on telling stories with data, mapping, visualization in just a moment. Give a couple minutes for everyone to get in. If you're here, I'd love to just see you say hello in the chat. Um, know who's out there. Yeah, well, I'm excited to be with you all. I'm coming in from Washington, D.C. My name is Mikel, and I do a lot of mapping, and that's what I'm going to get to talk about today. I will just start and share my slides. We'll start my screen share and take it away. All right. So hopefully everyone has seen some images from my slides. Yeah, thanks again. I'm really happy to be with you all. The topic of this session, using data to tell the story, mapping visualization, and more. My objective here is to give you an idea of what it takes to go from the conception of an idea and a set of data to a map visualization through a couple case studies that I've been involved with recently. And then also go through a lesson, a tutorial to introduce actually a pretty simple way of making maps using spreadsheets. It should take, I'm hoping it takes about 40 minutes to get through slides, so we have a good amount of time to take questions. I'd love to hear from you all. So my name is Mikel Maron. I am coming to you from a rainy Washington, D.C. I love maps. I've been involved with mapping for most of my career. Currently, I'm at Mapbox, which is a mapping technology company. I lead the community team. We work with nonprofits. We work with international organizations. We work with open source communities to make great maps. And I also have a long, I'm good. Hopefully the Slack notifications will just stop. I'm also been associated with the OpenStreetMap project for a big part of the past 15 years. I'm currently on the board of the OpenStreetMap Foundation, and I've been involved with related projects. I founded Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, and I also founded Map Kibera. And I'll talk about a little bit about all of these up front. I said Mapbox, we're a technology company. We build tools for developers to add maps to their applications. So that means geospatial, base maps, visualization, search, and routing are sort of the key APIs and components. And I lead the community team. As I said, we work with folks who are trying to apply maps to hard problems, hard challenges in the world, and support them as best we can. This is a big part of how the history of the company, how we came about. So it's work that me and my team get to continue to this day. For just a couple quick examples, the American Civil Liberties Union, you probably heard a lot about the US election these days. This is a visualization which shows the change over time in our political jurisdictions. It's a big issue, the way that these geometries are decided by state legislatures across the U.S. And they're often constructed in ways that are not fair. So this was a visualization of showing the contortions that these districts have been put through over the years. We worked with many groups that work with indigenous people to help them use maps to defend their rights, define their lands, protect against encroachment and conflicting rights over mineral extractions and others. So we've helped build tools and training and work with great partners like Amazon Frontlines. We work with a lot of governments and organizations as well, from big international organizations like the World Bank and World Food Program and UNESCO, to local governments. Here's the city of Melbourne. They put together applications to show the planning process of the city. So the different color of those extracted 3D buildings in the map indicate whether a building is already under construction, whether it's planned, or whether it's still being decided as part of the planning process. So it gives you a good sense of like what the city is going to be like and might be like. And the community team, we do a lot of things. We provide technical mentorship, pro bono volunteers, access to our products, very flexible around pricing and discounts as needed. And we love to tell the story of what our partners do. So I'll make this offer many times. If there's anything I can help you with, whether it's with Mapbox or anything mapping or with OpenStreetMap, please get in touch. Very happy to discuss and see how we can help. OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is a free and open map of the world. We say it's the Wikipedia of maps. And it's a bit of a misnomer to call it a map because it's really a database that anyone could edit. So here's a screenshot of a university here in DC, and in the editor, our web-based editor, the ID editor. And so you can click the edit button on any part of the world, go to openstreetmap.org, register, go to your hometown, click edit, and you'll be able to add roads, structures, points of interest, anything that is an important part of the base map. And it's OSM is like a really amazing community and data set. Thousands and thousands of people from all different backgrounds come together to create spatial data. Everyone from volunteers, open source enthusiasts, all the way up to some of the largest companies in the world. This is actually a visualization of edits by companies such as Apple and Facebook and Microsoft and Mapbox and GrabTaxi and others who are actively spending time improving the map as well. And so it's really a community, a collaboration from many different places, and the resulting quality of the data is amazing. If you need spatial data in Africa, I think it's hard to find anything which compares. And Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team started as a part of the OpenStreetMap community, really dedicated to humanitarian response. And this is a picture of Kathmandu Living Labs in Nepal amidst the response to the earthquake, which happened in Kathmandu in 2015. They became the nexus for a global effort to improve map data in Nepal following the earthquake, and we're all orchestrating it locally. So thousands of volunteers from around the world were mapping. These were the folks which were deciding what needed mapped, how to map it, and then they were doing a lot of application development and map production as well. It became a nexus for both local and international responders who needed applications or printed maps. Kathmandu Living Lab was the center of that, and that's a big part of how HOT operates. So visualization and geovisualization, I thought I'd try to define it. It's hard to, I think, summarize visualization as we generally thought of as taking data and making a graphical representation of it in charts or in graphs or maps. And to me, when I really got interested in visualization about 20 years ago, maps seemed the easiest thing to do. If you know where things are, you can plot them on a map, and you have a visualization which will tell something interesting. I say deceptively because it is really easy to get started with maps, and I'll show you a really easy and effective way to do so. But it's also a very deep and rich and complex discipline, which involves everything from working with data to graphic design to user experience. It's really deceptive. That it's easy and also not easy. But I think the best definition of like visualization and mapping is it's what people in these communities do. And so here are a couple links to great groups which host communities primarily on Slack of people who are involved in visualization and involved in spatial data and mapping. So datavisualizationsociety.com a great group if you're interested in visualization to connect and learn and get ideas. And the same, the spatialcommunity.org. Time check. Great. So first, I want to go through 2 case studies, give you an idea of what it takes to go from have a concept of what you'd like to, a story that you'd like to tell, mapping story that you would want to tell, what it takes to get from there, get to the data, to get to the visualization. Yeah. We're just going to have to live with some Slack notifications popping in. So the first example is from Kibera, which is a slum in Nairobi, Kenya. Myself and my wife, we went over 10 years ago to Kenya to work with community-based organizations and young people in the slum, which is one of the largest, around approximately 250,000 people in 2.5 square kilometers. It's well known, being in Nairobi, which is also the home to international organizations like UN Habitat. It gets a lot of attention, got a lot of attention in the post-election violence after the 2008 election in Kenya. And we went with the idea of let's work with young people to map this place, which was completely blank on all maps, government maps, commercial maps, OpenStreetMap. Work with them to map in Kibera, and that worked really well. We very rapidly, the team that came together on this really rapidly created that data back in 2010. There's a picture of Joshua Owino, who is kind of manager of Map Kibera, has been for several years now, sharing one of the wall maps, one of the ways that map data gets distributed in Kibera. And but it wasn't enough to make the map. It took a long time to figure out, okay, we have this data, how can it actually be useful for the community, and how can it build the relationships within the community so that understood challenges and was able to produce and share data and visualizations effectively. So the story here is a couple years ago, plans for constructing a connector road finally started to come into being in Kibera. There's been a lot of road building in Nairobi last several years, and most of Kibera is actually still government land, and so there is this plans for a road to connect to a ring road right through Kibera. And so here you see a aerial shot of the southern end of Kibera and sort of the clearance and the coming of the road into the slum. So there's a lot of concern like, well, yes, that's important, and there's going to be a clearance. What is the impact of that on the community? And this is not just like a collection of shacks. This is a kind of a city within a city itself that has schools, has health facilities, has churches, or many organizations, markets, industry. It's a place, it's a real place where people live. And so what would be the impact of this, and how could the road clearance be mitigated? So that was kind of the charge, and luckily we were able to get access to drone imagery. There's a Africa Drone Project group came to Nairobi and flew several missions, including in Kibera at the time of the first road clearance. And you can see in this image, the clearance coming from the north all the way to the south, right through part of Kibera, right along the edge of you see the Royal Nairobi Golf Course. And we got this imagery that could really, in contrast to satellite imagery, which is good enough if you have to see detail, if it's not too dense of a place. If you have a dense location like Kibera, satellite imagery has always not been enough to actually get a picture of what's on the ground and do map making. But the imagery here was so precise. You can see individual structures, and you can clearly see the width of the clearance. This is a point where it meets, where the road clearance meets a previous clearance that had been made along the rail track, which runs through right through Kibera. This is the line that goes from Mombasa to Kampala, Uganda, and it was really, the slum was really built up against the railway, which was dangerous, but also it was a big part of, it was a well-used space, many markets right on the railway, and so there's a clearance and there's some new construction, but not without controversy. It was very hard when this kind, to track displacement in this kind of situation. It's very hard to know how to compensate, for that kind of clearance. But we had this imagery, so we'd have a really good idea of what, at the very least, what has happened, what was cleared, and this gives you very precise information. The other data, which is that we decided to focus on, was schools, and Kibera had spent a lot of time collecting data on schools. Kibera has tens of thousands of students, nearly 50, 60,000. And no one knew how many schools there are. There are the official government registered schools, but that is not enough to serve the community. And there's many informal schools, some of which are really good. They're just not registered. Some of them are basically just kind of daycare for kids. And there was no kind of comprehensive data set for them. So Kibera went out, collected all these locations, and a lot of it, getting those locations is hard because you don't know where they all are. So you constantly have to ask people, ask schools, what other schools are around here. They found hundreds of schools and collected really deep data on them, from how many students, what kind of programs did they have, what were the structures like, how many teachers, what's the funding, what are the fees. And so this was all added directly into OpenStreetMap, so it's open data that was reusable for anyone. And here's a picture of Steve, who's on the team, taking a picture of the front gate of one of the schools. So they also took photographs of the outside of the school, the inside of the school. So it's not just data, but also visual information. And the team undertook an analysis. This is using this is kind of a first very rough iteration of the concept, first looking at the clearance along the railway of what's the impact on schools. And so you can do a geospatial analysis. You have that buffer area. You have a data set of all the points of the schools, show where all of the schools, or highlight all the schools that are within that buffer area. And that's where you see the greens and the reds there, whether they were demolished or somehow managed to be spared by the clearance. And this is using Quantum GIS, QGIS, which is a really great open source tool for doing GIS and doing some presentation. But this is a very traditional, classic kind of GIS presentation of the data. It's informative, but it's not necessarily as engaging as it could be, of really telling the story of what's happening there. So what we decided to do was use the interactive storytelling template that we produce at Mapbox. It was basically allows you to construct a map with many layers and different data sources. You construct a narrative, and as you scroll, you've probably seen other examples of these. As you scroll through the narrative, it will show, go through the map and show different views and turn layers on and off. So I'll show you an example of I'll show you what we came up with. So you should now see, I'm just going to quickly jump over just to see if there's any questions in the chat. Anything? Oh, great. Oh, hello, Janet. Yeah, so here's a satellite view of Kibera. It's kind of the start of our story. And here you see, as we scroll through, this is overlaying the UAV imagery to show what's most up to date. 100-meter wide path cleared north to south. And with the storytelling template, you can really control where the camera is looking on the map in order to give a give a sense of what's there. And we really want to give a sense of like traveling down this clearance, not just looking at it from above, but getting as close to the ground as we possibly can. So here you see it goes very close. Here's the point where it meets the railway. And then we continue down to the southern boundary. This is basically the shot that we started with, the aerial shot that we started with. Then we layered in all of the data from OpenStreetMap on schools from the Open Schools Kenya project. And the size of those circles is dependent on the number of students in each school. It's interesting, depending on the number of students, you change because a circle represents an area, you can't just change the radius of the circle linearly according to the number of students. You need to take the square root of the number of students. Otherwise, the schools with more students would be too proportionally bigger than the smaller schools. So just a minor point on how to visualize with circles and different kinds of data. And then here we're highlighting the schools which are within the path of the clearance and were demolished. And since we had data on the number of students, we were able to calculate there were 11 schools, and there were approximately 1,700 students which were impacted from the clearance. And then we end with a kind of a more exploratory model, so you can click around and see the data that's there. All right. So that is case study 1. Case study 2, in case you were not tired of hearing about the US election yet, this is an analysis that we did in Harris County, Texas, of ballot drop locations. With COVID, there's been a lot of attention paid to make it easier for people to safely vote. And in many jurisdictions, there are drive-up drop boxes where you can hand over or put in a box your vote, your ballot, rather than going into a polling station. And that's what had been set up in Texas. Here's a picture of one in Travis County, where Austin is. And the governor of Texas, well, what happened is Harris County, which is very big, the most diverse county in Houston, in America, more people from different backgrounds from all over the world. It's fairly large. Nearly 4 million people live there. They set up drop-off locations across the county so that it wouldn't be far to drive. The governor of Texas later ruled, and then it went through the courts, and finally it was ruled that they can only offer 1 drop box per county, which means that at the extreme, you might have to drive 47 miles to drop off your ballot versus maybe, before that, maybe 10. So reducing the number of drop boxes significantly reduced access to the vote. And so we wanted to see, well, what kind of impact does this actually have on the population of Harris County? First thing we had to do was get the data of the drop boxes. This was harder than you would think. The Harris County made the data available on ArcGIS Online, Esri's platform for sharing geospatial data and maps. But there was no way to download this data. And so we had to do a little bit of behind the scenes work, like open the web console and then looked at the requests that were being made for the map, and then identified one which looked like it had data in it. And it turned out there was a file, a JSON file, which had the data of all those precise locations. So we were able to request that file directly, parse out those locations, and then we had the locations of each of those drop-off locations. The other data set we wanted to use was demographic data. Wanted to look at where, the population, where people lived throughout the county. Some places are much denser than others. We wanted to look at other demographic information like ethnicity, like age, and see if, answer a couple questions. One, what was the population that was affected by this reduction, and did it disproportionately affect one group or another? The way we did that was using isochrones. Isochrones is a technique. You take a point and you calculate the polygon, the shape where you could possibly travel to within some period of time. So this image you see here is centered on Mapbox's office in DC, and it shows all the places in the purple area, all the places you could cycle to in 20 minutes in DC. And so what we did in Harris County was take the isochrones for all those polling locations, all those drop-off places, merge them together, and then calculated two things. What was the population? And the isochrone for each of those was, we decided 20-minute drive was kind of a reasonable amount for traveling in Harris County. We then took that polygon of all the merged isochrones and said, how many people live within this area? And then what are the demographics? And then we compared it to, if the remaining one location, the 20-minute drive time for that, how many people were within that area and what were the demographics? And then we found out there was a pretty big discrepancy. We went nearly 3 million people were within a 20-minute drive to, I don't remember the exact number, but something like 800,000 people were within a 20-minute drive. So significantly reduced access. As far as demographics, because Harris County is so diverse, there was not really, everyone was impacted equally, all groups. So there was not like one group or another which was overly impacted by this, except that the governor's order heavily impacted a more diverse place. This is the first iteration of the map, which we worked with a partner on this, and I have to say, the cartography choices, the color choices here, were not as good as they could be, and so we worked with them to style it, and this was kind of where we are. I'll jump into the browser again. This is where we ended up, and so here you can see the green area. Green and blue were the colors, with green for the area that was covered by the isochrones and blue for the underlying demographic data. Here, population, density. We chose those colors because they're complementary and it's easy to see them together. This was sort of the location that was covered with all the locations, and this was afterwards. And so this is a simple visualization tool to just show change in maps by swiping. And you can also zoom in and see a little more detail. The one thing I'll say here about, if you see the background information, those census blocks are colored according to their population density. So if there's higher density, they're colored darker. We went back and forth with our partner on this to help them understand that at first they wanted to just use the raw population counts. And with the raw population counts, you might have some very large tracts out here in the more suburban parts of the city, which had a high population, but were not as dense as places in the area. So the density is a function of the raw count of population as well as the area that you're looking at. And if you're dealing with population, you want to work with density rather than raw counts. Otherwise, it misrepresents the data and highlights things which are actually not as accurate. We are very familiar with this in the U.S. in our election maps, in that you'll see very lightly populated areas taking up more area look more dominant on the election maps, even though they represent less voters. And so if you account for the population density, you actually see a map which much more accurately reflects the the political spectrum within the U.S. All right, quick jump back to chat just to see if there's anything I should do. Okay, great. So a little exercise to end things up, and then I'll happy to go into Q&A. So we are working on SheetMapper. Now, SheetMapper is a what we call a impact tool that we've put together at Mapbox. It's a full tutorial. It goes step by step through everything that you need to do in order to build something. It makes very little assumptions about your technical background. So if you don't need to be a programmer. It assumes you maybe know how to use Google Sheets and know how to copy paste and push buttons. It's pretty push button. The focus really with this is making it easy for you to take the data that you have or create new data and visualize with it. So let me show you. I'll just start by showing the result I'm going for. This is a simple map of the San Francisco Bay Area. You see there's points throughout, and you click on the points, and it gives you more detail. The data here is all food banks across the Bay Area, where people who need supplemental food can access it. So you can click on these locations and get the address and contact information for these places. And all of this is driven by, the starting point really is a Google spreadsheet. You can see there's the name, the address, information, phone number, links, and critically, there's two columns in the spreadsheet, which makes this all work: latitude and longitude. So you'll see that each of these locations has a latitude and longitude, and that's what gets used to place the markers on the map. So I'm going to just scroll through a bit of the tutorial and to give you a sense of how it works. As I said, you start it with a Google spreadsheet. You can duplicate the one that I showed and then customize it, or you can create your own. And there's a couple ways. You might ask, well, how do you get the latitude and longitude? I'm going to suggest for y'all to use a service called Nominatum, which is the search which comes with OpenStreetMap. And I recommend it because it works entirely on OpenStreetMap data, so you'll have a lot of great features. All the features which are in OpenStreetMap across Africa will be available for you. So let's, I don't know, Java House, Nairobi, see if that comes up with anything. Okay, so I searched for Java House Nairobi, coffee shop, and in Nairobi, and you can see here there's many Java House across the city, and I clicked on details on the first one, which is in the Central Business District, and then you can see here there's a center point with the latitude and the longitude of that point. And so you'd simply copy and paste into your spreadsheet the latitude and the longitude of those locations there, and then go through for each of those, each of the places that you want to geocode. So then, once you've built your spreadsheet with location information, you need to make it publicly available. So go into sharing, make it so that anyone with the link can view, and then you have to construct a URL to get what's called a CSV. A CSV is a comma-separated value format. It's a really simple way of taking tabular data, spreadsheet-like data, and sharing it. And so the format of that, this gives you a little bit of a little template in which you copy. This is sort of the key thing. This is sort of the identifier for the sheet as a whole. And that gets copied in here. And then you need to add the sheet name. And that's down here. Sheet 1 is the name of that sheet. So you would simply copy that into this template, the key, and the sheet name from the spreadsheet. If it's made public, you now have a link directly to load the CSV of your data, which makes it really easy to load into the map. So I promised that no one had to program to do this, and that's true. We provide a complete template for hosting the map. We share this on GitHub, and basically this is basically a copy and paste and modify. You don't need to worry about all the code here. There's just 2 places, and this is covered in SheetMapper, where you'll need to change a couple things. First, add your Mapbox token. So in order to load a map with Mapbox, you need to have an account and an access token. So that's pretty easy to get. It's really quick. You go to mapbox.com, register an account, and then you go to your accounts page, and there's a link to tokens, and you copy that token and paste it into this document. The second place where you need to make a change is here, replace with CSV export link. So that's the link directly to CSV that we constructed earlier from the Google Sheet. So and all these steps are covered in detail right in the tutorial. So finally, okay, well, how do you publish this? How do you actually host it on the web? We're using GitHub to do this, and you don't need to be familiar with GitHub if to do this. It's pretty simple. So in GitHub, you can create what's called a repository. Sign up for GitHub, that's free. Create a repository. Here I created one called Test Sheet. And then you actually can directly in the browser, you can add and edit new files. And so here I'm going into the editor. This entire thing is just all the code from here, just copied, pasted in here into this file. And then I'll show you this is what the token looks like. Here I pasted in the token from Mapbox. And then I pasted in the link directly to the CSV for the sheet. And then this down here, you can commit your changes, and that's all you need to do. Just create that one single file called index.html. Oh, there's one more thing you need to do in order to publish it. GitHub has a great service called Git Pages, and it allows you to publish a simple website. And the way you do that is you go into your settings for your repository. And if you scroll down in settings, there's a section called GitHub Pages. And you'll basically go in and select, it says source. You select branch main. That'll be the only thing you probably have if it's a new repository. And once that's selected, that's it. It will start to publish. You say your site is being published at this URL, which is the one I showed you over here. So there's a bit of create an account, bit of configuration, a bit of copy paste and modification, and it's pretty straightforward. If you go through every one of these steps is documented in the SheetMapper tutorial. I know that was a lot to go through, so I'm happy to take any questions on it. Yeah, and before I shift over to chat and talk directly, like I said, if you need to get in touch, please do. Mapbox.com/community has a get in touch link. You can also email me directly at Mikel@mapbox.com. I'm happy to hear from you and to help. So I'll stop sharing. Oh, right there. Great, I'm back. All right. So, what are your questions? I'm going to start with what's in the chat, and then please, please add anything, anything I can talk about further. Let's see. Yeah, nice to see you, Janet. I'm glad you are interested in storytelling, Linda. So here's a question from Janet. How can small organizations like Crowd2Map get involved with Mapbox, and how easy are your tools to use? The Mapbox community team is very interested in supporting small organizations that have social impact mission. So I think it's the easiest way to get started is talk to us, talk about what your needs are, and what your technical capacities are, because that differs a lot. Some groups have very little technical capacity. Some have, maybe they could have developers on staff. Maybe you're just an individual. We're like the SheetMapper tutorial is really designed to be easy and straightforward and to talk about every single step. Mapbox Studio, which is our cartographic environment, is really designed. We have a great guide to using Mapbox Studio, and it's really designed for. It's an entirely interactive environment. It's almost kind of like Photoshop or Illustrator, but for maps. And there's some really interesting new tools to make it even easier to work with data in Studio. We have what are called style components and data visualization components. So if you want to style your data in a way, you don't necessarily need to do a lot of configuration. You can just select from a list. And yeah, what is the link to get started with SheetMapper? Let me get that. Here's the link to SheetMapper. It is a free tool. It's totally open source and you can reuse it. Mapbox services are commercial, but we have a very generous free tier. So we count things by the number of map loads, which is the same as a web load. And so it's free up to 50,000 map loads per month. And if you see something that you're working on exceeding that, that's great. I'm very interested to support that and to find ways of covering those costs, and especially if it's a social impact project. And so the community team does a lot of couponing and covering costs for things which are important. For instance, we couponed hundreds of maps which were built during the COVID response because there was a high amount of usage. There were a lot of people experimenting very rapidly, and we didn't want the account stuff to get in the way. And so we covered those costs. And so please ask, and we can figure out what we can do. But as I said, 50,000 map loads per month is a lot. Like a lot of even popular maps don't necessarily meet those limits. And so there's a lot to do even without having to talk to us. Yes, and I'll give a plug as well for Janet's session tomorrow, along with Jeffrey from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team at 11 a.m. I assume GMT, to talk more about OpenStreetMap and Youth Mappers, which is a really great program at universities, starting clubs to get students involved directly in making and using map data, which has immediate impact on the world. OpenStreetMap is something that anyone can contribute to, and it's being used right away. And so it's very, I think particularly for students, it's really powerful to have an opportunity to contribute to something in real life, as well as at the same time learning and developing skills and building a strong network. What else can I talk about? We still have 15 minutes to go. I certainly can ramble on for a long time if left to my own devices, but I'd love to hear from you all. Anything you're wondering about, or anything else I can talk about in more detail, or questions you have about what I presented. Another thing I would love to hear is if you have an idea or something that you're working on, would love to hear about it, and I can give some thoughts on how you might accomplish that. Janet asks, how does SheetMapper differ from UMap? So UMap is an open source free service for collaboratively adding points on a map together, and then styling and publishing it. I think UMap is can accomplish a lot of the same things. It's a different interface. I sometimes and so there's a bit of a learning curve, I think, sometimes to get to use it. And there's also the ways that how you can control how it's like visualizing styles kind of limited to what UMap offers. And so SheetMapper relies on using sheets for the collaborative environment, which is something that a lot of people are really familiar with and already using. There's a lot of collaboration and data gathering which already happens in Google Sheets, and so from there it's very fairly easy to publish. Because it's just HTML, you can there's further customization. So if you wanted to change the base map or style things differently, or easily embed on another site, that's very simple with SheetMapper. So I think UMap is a great tool. It has a lot of power. SheetMapper maybe, like, for certain audiences, like very like they don't even have to think about the map. It just will happen, and also has more flexibility in how it's used. So it depends on the situation, depends on who's involved, and what you think is the best. It's worth trying both and seeing what's the best for your group. So hopefully that answers a little bit of the difference between SheetMapper and UMap. Definitely recommend checking it out. Maybe if you have a link, Janet, you could share it there. Sharon asks, is it possible to share your presentation? Yes. Let me make sure that this is shared. I believe it is. Yes, anyone on the internet can view. So that's a link to the presentation. So you're welcome to take a direct look at the slides. Stephen, planning to map Accra in the coming months, making that data available. Cool. Stephen, I'm curious to hear what you are going to be mapping in Accra. And I think that makes then there's a lot of options from there about how you do it and how you make the data available depending on what you're doing. So, like, yeah, OpenStreetMap could be good for certain things, but it depends on the kind of data. And there's a lot of great tools for data collection as well. Jeffrey asks, is the recording for this session that will be shared? I think so. That's a question for the organizers. I think they said that there'll be recordings. So I don't know for sure. but I believe so. No, thanks. So there's a link to UMAP to a UMAP that CrowdMap constructed, I believe. I'm guessing from the name. Ah, cool. So Steven says that he's planning to fly drones, and that is awesome. So there's lots of ways of sharing drone imagery. Open Drone Map, Open Aerial Map. These are great ways of doing it so that other people have access to the data. You can upload the resulting data files, the GeoTIFF. You can upload that to Mapbox so that it gets tiled and then is really fast to build applications on. You can also, if you are say digitizing in OpenStreetMap, you can configure the OpenStreetMap editors to use the tiles which Mapboxes are producing. Mapbox produces from uploaded GeoTIFF. So there could be a lot of good stuff that's done. You can also create stories like the one I showed with Map Kibera. So that's just processed in Mapbox Studio, and then you have a front end where you can, as shown, can change the camera and turn layers on and off, and kind of tell a narrative around the data that you found. Linda asks, what's the starting point for anyone who wants to venture into data storytelling? What tips do you have for a novice? Yes, I'm giving it some thought because there's a few different things involved. First, I think it's really useful to get familiar with data and the collection of data. So whether that's through something like SheetMapper and just choosing, it doesn't even need to be a great story of just something that's maybe personally interesting. All the places that you've lived, or the places that you've, now that we can't really travel, the places that you'd like to be visiting, if you really could, and go through the process of like adding those locations into a spreadsheet and geocoding them, and then showing them on the map. Another way of getting familiar with data collection is with OpenStreetMap. What are just collect some area, places in your local neighborhood. So that's one thing. But certainly, like, just having data does not like give the story, and so it's really good. I think it's good familiarity to kind of get a sense of, well, what's possible with data. But then I'd also say, it's really first starting with, well, what is important to you? What's a compelling issue or story that should be told? And is there a geographic element to it? Like, does a map say something that is that's really insightful? Because not every story has, I only think about maps most of the time, but I will admit that not everything needs to be on a map. And so, thinking about something, is there something which has a spatial aspect which is interesting to explore? And once you have that, then the question comes, okay, well, you need to tell that story. You're gonna what is the data you want to collect and investigate and analyze in order to get to that story? And that could mean collecting data yourself. It could mean joining a community that's collecting data. It could mean finding open data sources, like we did with the Harris County maps, and identifying good sources of data or augmenting that with data that you create yourself, I think is really important. And then there's a lot of complicated analysis and a lot of complicated presentation. I'd say, like, really start simple. Like I said, the SheetMapper is great. The storytelling format is really good, and try things out. See what the result is. Don't aim for perfection at first. Just start experimenting, practice, and get connected with other people who are doing similar work. Like I said up front, there's great communities like the Data Visualization Society, like the Spatial Community, and these are places also where you can become inspired and see what other people have done and give ideas for things that you could do. So a lot of things, there's a lot of stories which are just told by someone might try something in one part of the world. It's really interesting to just reproduce that and do something similar in another part of the world. For example, during COVID, there's a group in Brazil which wanted to illustrate the impact of all of the deaths from COVID in Brazil by visualizing that. Well, what if it was just people in your neighborhood? How big of an area just around you would that represent? And we're talking like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So they took a great approach. They took population data, and it's really devastating. You find your location, and then it kind of draws a circle. Like, this is the circle around where you live. If all the people were your neighbors, this is how big the circle was. And that was it was really powerful. They did that for Brazil, and it really got a lot of excitement, and it was so cool and so informative that the Washington Post here in the States also said, oh, let's do it for the U.S. And so they worked with that same team and produced the visualization. And so there's lots of things to be inspired by and kind of like just reuse and tweak as well. Question from Francis: would you recommend Tableau software for simple data visualizations? Yes, Tableau is really powerful environment. A lot of people love using Tableau to make it, a easy environment for adding charts, graphs, and maps. And the maps are, within Tableau are powered by Mapbox, and so you'll get a great map visualization environment as well. So if you have access to Tableau, it's a great tool. There are lots of other BI tools or business intelligence tools out there to check out as well. Power BI from Microsoft, a lot of people use, and there's a lot of open source versions as well. But I think Tableau is among the most popular, and so yeah, if you do have access to it, then it can be really good. And there's a lot of great supports with the Tableau community is really strong. There's user groups. There are folks called Zen Masters who try to help other people out. Issues around admin boundaries. One thing I would say about admin boundaries, and that we've worked hard on, is making there's not any because different people think about admin boundaries, and it depends on what issues you're talking about, Janet. But like, one issue is that different, at least national boundaries, are looked at differently in different places, and so you want to be able to represent them both. So we have what are called worldviews in Mapbox, and you can choose different worldviews or add your own boundaries. And you can then take those custom styles and use those in Tableau. So you don't need to use the default Mapbox style if it doesn't have the boundaries the way you want to show them. You can customize that as well. We also work a lot on getting updated district boundaries in Tanzania being out of date. Well, the boundaries team at Mapbox is really active on updating this, and so if there are discrepancies, I'd love to hear some of the details, and then I'll share that with the boundaries team so that they can look into updates. A lot of the time, it's about, can we actually locate data that we can reuse, and some places admin boundaries are openly available, other places they're not, and that constrains our ability to be as up to date as possible. So yeah, Jenna, please let me know some details, and we'll look into it. All right, have got the 60-second warning. So Any last questions before I wrap up? All right, take that note. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Really enjoyed sharing the stuff with you. And like I said, here I'll just probably the best way to get in touch. Box.com/community, or email, my work email. Feel free to contact me with anything. All right. Bye, everybody.